Kia ora tātou. Kia ora. Welcome back, everyone, to our last session of this 4-day international conference on child abuse and neglect. Can I just say, I think the energy and the ideas throughout the conference has been incredible. And I just really enjoyed watching people having conversations, sharing their best ideas, making connections. It has been inspiring, fabulous, and humbling just to be a part of it. So thank you all for just being here and taking part. So the last half hour, we have a fantastic panel for you, who I'm going to get them to introduce themselves in a minute. You can see we've got a real powerhouse panel here with a whole set of ideas and opinions. I've asked them to be very opinionated. We're looking for a conversation, so we want to hear your questions, your thoughts, your challenges, your ideas, your moments of inspiration, or any question you'd wish to put to the panel. Just before I get the panel to introduce themselves, I just wanted to say that the messages I've been picking up throughout the 4 days is that people really want to do this again. And we're starting conversations already about having a conference here in Aotearoa in the next couple of years. And I just think the inherent value of getting people from so many different perspectives and so many different agencies together in the same space, sharing their best learning and practice, learning about each other and how we work together is inherently valuable. So I feel right now very committed to getting support from our VCB and from our partners and putting together something that truly reflects where we're all going. And one of the comments, one of the good bits of feedback I got was a stronger NGO voice next time around, and so we'll certainly pay attention to that because our NGO providers are a really critical part of children's safety and well-being. So kia ora to that comment. So now it's my job to introduce to you the panel. I'm actually going to ask them to introduce themselves. We'll just go along from the line here, and then we will open up the floor to any questions, comments, or salutations from our fabulous audience. So I'm going to start with Shane. Welcome.
Kia ora. Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Ki te mana whenua o te rohi nei. Nā te whātua tēnā koutou. Ki ngā hoa mahi no te Waipounamu, me Dikau Māui, me Ahireira, me Nahui Whā, tēnā koutou. My name is Shane Walker, and I'm from Bluff. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou katoa, ko Carol tana te pānia tōku ingo. Ngā mihi māhana ki a koutou. I'm a manager for the Māngere Family Service Centre Social Service Team.
Kia ora tātou. My name is Mike Manelli and I'm the General Manager for Child and Family Services at Bernardo's, New Zealand.
Kia ora and g'day. My name is Kate Alexander and I'm from Sydney, Australia. I'm a social worker in child protection. My position is called the Senior Practitioner for the New South Wales Department of Family and Community Services, same as your CYF.
Talofa lava, whakalofalahi atu, kia ora ana, maloe lelei, pula vinaka, and greetings. My name is Makawina Fuemanangaro, and I am the Clinical and a Service Manager for a new Pacific organisation called Whenua Ola, and we are based out in Otahuhu. So, welcome. Oh, yes. Hi.
Kia ora tātou, my name is Richie Polton. I'm a employee of the University of Otago. I run a longitudinal study that's been running for 40-something years. I hope I don't look old enough to have founded it. I took over from the founder 15 years ago. I also have a part-time role with the Ministry of Social Development as the Chief Science Advisor. That's a recent appointment. And if you're aware that there was an external panel appointed today by the Minister, you'll also see my name listed in the panel membership.
So as you can see, a diverse, very experienced and esteemed panel you have in front of you this afternoon. So I'm going to open up the floor for questions, comments. Now's your time for a conversation about what's been on your mind through the duration of this conference, what's come up that surprised you or sparked your interest or thoughts, or something you'd like to ask and know a bit more about. Over to you. Show of hands, we'll bring you a mic. One here, please.
Thank you. Something that has surprised me, I'm not sure pleasant or otherwise at the stage, but about the panel. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on the Minister's announcement.
That's obviously not for me.
I'm also the chairperson of the Social Workers Registration Board, so in that sense I'm an employee of the Minister. In saying that, I'm a human being who is passionate about social work in Aotearoa, and I'm passionate about the outcomes that young people get. And so I want to commend Russell and his presentation this morning when he said specifically that the room was full of people who were passionate, who cared, who want the best things to happen for kids. And so the first thing I would like to do is to say, especially to the SIF staff, e kia kaha. Just be strong with this. The way that I read the press release, it seems to be more systematic and institutional rather than frontline. But when you look at the scope of the thing, there's a lot more in the detail. And there are a number of us who want to try and work constructively in this. In social work, we are a group of people, and we're not the only field that does this, so I'm not claiming this as our space, but we are agents of change. In this case, we have no choice but to be agents of our own change. Kia ora.
My view of the brief for the panel, which is very broad and almost all-encompassing, is that it's a logical step on from Paul Nixon's very good report from 18 months ago. That was a brave report. It was self-critical. It was constructive. To really get progress, you have to have those key ingredients. That is a critical eye and a preparedness to take on some tough issues. I believe the report, the panel that's been established is going to have to display all those characteristics to do justice to the task that's been set. We've not yet met. That will happen for the first time tomorrow. I'm not being disingenuous or trying to avoid the question. I really don't know exactly what the next steps will be other than to meet and to get briefed tomorrow. I'm a researcher by trade. I'm interested in the translation of research for the betterment of people. That's why I've taken on the advisor role, and those are the skills I'll bring to that panel. I hope we do you justice. We'll work very hard to do just that.
Lovely. Children's Commissioner over there.
Hasn't he said enough already? Can I just tautoko both of that? This is a room full of hard-working people who care very deeply about children. And I, for one, do not agree that child, youth and family is 8 to 10 years behind. I think in this room, the very clear message that I've been getting from our guests from overseas is, in fact, that a lot of the practice in child protection, both in child, youth and family and the NGO sector, health, education and police, is in fact world leading. What I do think, though, is that the change agenda we have before us is massive. It's a huge agenda. And clearly there will need to be investment in care and protection. So we need to make sure that child, youth and family has all the support it can possibly get. And I think, looking at putting the press release aside and looking at the terms of reference and the scope of this panel, I think we've got some very senior, very skilled people who've got the right skills to support child, youth and family going forward. And in particular to make that investment case. So while I think the press release was unfortunately worded, I think the panel are the right people to do a really good job and support child, youth and family going forward. So for all of you who are involved in child, youth and family and NGOs funded by CYF, I would ask you to support the panel. These are good people who are going to work really hard on all of our behalf to get the best possible outcomes for the children that we all care about.
Got it. Okay, the question over there.
Can I respond, bringing the focus back to this conference and apropos of the comment about how up-to-date things are. I've seen in the last 2 days evidence of what in New Zealand, for me, at least as a person who's sat on numerous committees over the last 15 years, evidence of something very special and very cutting edge. And that is genuine respect for Te Ao Māori perspective. Not only respect for, but genuine embracing of Māori and their worldview, and a genuine desire, particularly from Pākehā, to learn from Māori. And it's evidenced in the constant and necessarily constant oft-repeated refrain that it's all about relationships. Now, Māori have an enormous amount to teach us about the tikanga of how you operate in collaborative groups. And I have not seen such universal, within a group of people from disparate backgrounds, albeit focused on children, such a deep, genuine and excitement around the possibilities. It's usually been a problem. Most committees, the committees hit this sort of roadblock about how do we integrate Māori perspectives with, say in my case, Western science paradigms. There are models out there, and this is the pointy-headed researcher speaking, and it's from the evidence-based perspective I'm about to comment, because you have to prove impact, right? That's the zeitgeist. Everyone wants to see your impact upon outcomes. And the way you do that in this context of respect is you allow for two paradigms to run in parallel, the Western science paradigm and a kaupapa Māori paradigm. And you allow them to inform each other, and this is called braided rivers. Angus MacFarlane from Christchurch has talked about this. And the determination of whether an intervention has worked is quite straightforward if you allow for this equal rights, equal respect, dual setup. That is, there has to be proof of impact or effectiveness for both approaches. And then it gets a big tick. So there are ways of moving this forward that take the heart, the warawa, and move it into practical implementation. And I would just urge one thing, and that is, whilst this is very special in terms of Māori getting at the top table and being respected and heard and learnt from, let's not forget Pacifica. Thank you.
So there's a question there.
Kia ora. I'd just like to start by thanking everyone who's been here and presented for such an excellent conference. I think the quality of the presentations has been outstanding. I work in the NGO sector, so I'd like to tautoko the comments about, I think, a greater representation and voice of NGOs in these forums, because what I hear is an increasing expectation or reliance on community to pick up some of the work that we know that can't be done or is less likely to be done at a statutory level for a whole lot of reasons. So I have a few concerns around blithely talking about partnership between community and government, because I don't think it's a very equal partnership in many respects, and I don't think the community sector is as well resourced as we would hope to be able to uptake that work and to have really good outcomes for our whānau. But I'd also like to kind of, I guess, bring back that question of social justice and how we advocate for social justice, because we can get really sidetracked into what is good practice, and we've all got huge amounts of work, so we're all kind of sort of head down, bum up, busily kind of working out how we can do things better at a practice level. But we're working day in and day out with whānau who don't have resources themselves. And so how do we advocate not only for resources for the work that we do, but how do we advocate for basic resources for all of our whānau more generally? Because I think until we look at some of those structural issues, it's all going to be sort of how we ice the cake We need to grow the cake, and we need to make sure everyone gets a good slice of it, even if you're on a sugar-free diet. So it's not about, I don't kind of talk about advocacy necessarily in the context of biting the hand that feeds you. I think we all have to be a little bit cautious of that. But we all need to take a bit of a nibble, I think, here and there.
Okay, kia ora, great questions. We have 3 NGO representatives at the table. Let's turn to our NGO partners and say, what needs to be done to improve the relationship between the community service sector and the government? What can we do that will improve it?
I think I do worry in answering this question in biting the hand that feeds me. I've got a slightly cynical view about the minister's announcement, and I recognise the importance of wanting to, go with the change people and support it. But actually, at the Nixon-led review on the workload issues in child and family clearly made out the case for investment. And actually, if you don't like that case, what do? You get another panel and ask them to go and look at it. And I do wonder whether if that panel comes up and says there's a case for investment, whether there will be another panel, really. And that's probably a completely career-limiting move. But I kind of...
I liked it.
And I guess connected to that, and I'll get to the NGO question in a minute, was that... I guess, and I reflected on the conference here and some of the amazing stuff. There is still, to me, some of the narrative is about managing the threshold as a way to address the child protection issues. That it's the way we do this. It's a matter of perspective, not of actuality. So let's describe what we do slightly differently, and then we kind of don't have to bother. And that kind of seems to me to miss the reality for kids. Right, you actually are faced with the reality of what it means to be hurt, harmed, and living in a very difficult circumstance. And I was quite struck by Russell's presentation this morning around the history, really, about the, and it's interesting in terms of the minister's amount that normally what instigates these kind of announcements is a child death or a child inquiry. It doesn't in this case, but generally that's what it is. And it kind of reminded me, really, we seem to listen more to the voices of our dead children than we do to those who are living every day. And I find that really sad, really. And I think if there's something could shift that kind of discourse around let's manage the threshold to one which is about how do you get services to vulnerable children and families, whether that might make a difference. I think it's hard for NGOs. I was late to this conference because I sat in a meeting trying to discuss our contract. And in the last year or so, I've been in several meetings where the kind of feedback we've got about the NGO sector, and I'm very proud of what the NGO sector does, and particularly now is that we're kind of cheerful, cheap, and not quite competent. And I know that's not held everywhere, but there is some of that there. And I found myself this week having to justify a price difference between delivering 20 hours of social work versus 40 hours of social work to vulnerable families, and the impact it would make. And I'm kind of thinking, actually, 20 hours, 40 hours, think about the people we're working with. If you think 20 hours or 40 hours is going to make a difference, then you need to think again. But actually asking me to say, what value for money can I deliver 20 hours was quite difficult. I think there might be power in banding together in terms of going to your question about how you might advocate for greater resources. I think the work that's been done on the Children's Commission around child poverty has been outstanding, and I think some of the stuff we've seen, that the shift in language from government around we want to deal with children who are in hardship rather than in poverty, try and reframe it that way. I think some of this, the Minister's review is part of some of the response to try and divert the attention away from looking at some of the cause and structural issues of what kids and families face rather than trying to deal with them.
Hi, in response to your question as well, from our small Pacific, but big, out to Huhu, we try very hard to work. We work with our with child and family services, because we know that it's really important for us as an NGO to build relationships with these sites and also with the police. And my experience also in resources, they have been very generous to us as well with referral, but also understand the content and how hard the work that we do on the ground. Yes, there is the funding issues, and we're still, but the people that we've been talking to are very open to have those discussions, and it's a working in progress. So while there are some areas that needs to improve, we're working towards to build those better relationships, because at the end of the day, for us, it is about our family, it is about our children. And sometimes that goes beyond working from 9 to 5. Sometimes that goes from 9 to 12 o'clock or weekend on calls. So no amount of money can put value to those services, but we're doing it, and we have to build relationship. If we really do believe about collaboration, then we need to do it. You know, we're not going to just say collaboration and then we go back to our own little places and start saying, well, where is it? So for us, it's about Pacific, we have to make do. It's just like this afternoon when there is a presentation that was in regards to the new models that the Child and Family Pacific staff have worked extremely hard. And and they were given a small room with 5 presentations an hour, and we have learned to make do, but it's not good enough. So, but that's what's been handed to us, and we'll work towards it, because we know at the end of the day, it is about our children, it is about our families. And most of you who work in SIFs also work and also have clients, Pacific clients as well. So it is exciting, but at the same time, it is challenging.
Kate.
Thank you.
Go on, Mike.
Look, great question. I just wanted to say something about practice and social justice being seen as perhaps polarised or separate, because good practice is just practice, and particularly for statutory social workers, the importance of assessing context and being able to put yourselves in the shoes of the families we're working with, and understanding what living with disadvantage means for parents and their parenting has to be the job of statutory systems. And at their worst, the role, and Kate spoke very well about this the other day, about is our role about assessing and investigating, or is it actually helping families? And you can't help families without understanding and having a sense of social justice. At their worst, histories of statutory systems that bring children into care and suddenly spend a whole lot of money on those children in care, 10 times more than was going into the family we took them from, and how statutory systems start saying we have to be creative about this, and we have to find ways to unlock money in the system to put into families, and keeping social justice and appreciation of context as a part of just practice, not separate.
Kia ora. Okay, more questions. Question at the back then, and then we've got a question down there.
Tala Falava, thank you for the opportunity. I have a question. I have an encouragement for our next future conference. In the past, we've heard and we've seen some awesome presentation in terms of culture with the Tangata Whenua and Pasifika and so forth. I just would like to encourage for the next one. I would love to see more of the Aboriginal, some models and frameworks from, original, as in original, because I was quite saddened, because not always did I go to Australia or anything, but I was so looking forward this year to actually, learn more about, some frameworks along the Aboriginal, and so that I can compare to how we do things in here in Aotearoa. That's my bit.
Good statement, really thoughtful statement. Thank you for that. Lovely. There's a question down here.
Actually, just about that, can I encourage people to attend the conference in Darwin in September? It's the World Indigenous Social Work Conference. There are a number of people in the room here who went to the last one in Winnipeg. It's stunning, and it's right in the heart of it. Where it is expensive to get to, and the conference won't be cheap. But actually, the people who are running that conference, they need us to whakamana them. They need us to look after them, and so we need to register and we need to get there. And for those of you from Aotearoa, we need to be there in droves to support them. They're our neighbours. Kia ora.
Kia ora. The mic, Nicola.
You asked us to reflect on what struck us, and I mean, this has been a very positive conference, but I've been really pondering something, and I've heard some other people thinking about it. In the presentation that on the children's team, some data was put up that showed that overwhelmingly the referrals to the children's teams are for children from benefit-dependent households. And we know that they are overrepresented in referrals to child, youth and family. And it's so obvious that I couldn't believe I hadn't kind of thought about. I started thinking about that ecologically. Is this a statement about those families, and we're really good at beating up on beneficiary-dependent families, or is this something that just tells us we haven't got the settings set right, and that we need a macro solution to this, and that if we could deal with that part of it, it might free up a whole lot of energy to deal with the other issues those families have. And I just haven't been able to shake it, and so I want to put it out there that maybe this is an issue we should be collectively, from all our different roles, advocating on.
Kia ora.
Panel wants to comment on that? Okay, I have a question down here, gentleman here. Thank you for that, Nicola. Thoughtful insight there. Gentleman here in the grey shirt. Distinguished looking chap.
Hi everyone, I'm Julian from Berry Street in Victoria. And picking up the theme that's just been opened up, something that's really struck me about this conference is the language. Firstly, the Maori language, but also the language which I think is very labelling. The language of vulnerable children, the language of uplift. I just find that extraordinary that we describe the removal of child as uplift, and I took my head to, well, if the child is uplifted, does that mean that the family is downtrodden through that process? In Australia, there's a lot of discussion about welfare dependency, and here it seems to be the benefit households. In Australia, our problem is not welfare dependency, it's welfare deficiency. And the benefit household stuff was ringing in my head again and again. And the thing that I noticed, I think the figure was about 50% of referrals were from benefit households. And I thought, well, doesn't that mean that 50% are from non-benefit households? So isn't it the non-benefit households that are letting the team down? And why aren't we talking about that? So I think something we can control, among the many things that we can't control, is the language we use. And that we have to decide, I think, not to use the language vulnerable children, not to use the language uplift, not to use the language benefit household, and to use the language that we want to use, language about material poverty. And I say material poverty because an Aboriginal man in Australia reminded me that the most materially poor man in his community, his elder, was the most culturally rich. So I'm interested in what the panel members think they can do and will do to change the language.
Great question. Language.
I want to speak to the social work profession first. I think we have to articulate and own the space of some of that language. I don't think our articulations about it have been forceful enough for us to be taken as a profession seriously. If you don't agree with me, then why don't we have mandatory registration? Why don't we stack up alongside a whole lot of other professions? And so I think in terms of the language, before it's defined for us, if we don't articulate it, others will. And I completely agree with you. For those of you here who are educationalists, you'll be familiar with Vygotsky. And Vygotsky used the term, language is the cradle of concepts. And I love it because how we say it is how we think about it. Kia ora.
Language. Kate?
Look, thanks, Julian. Anyone who knows me knows that I've been really banging on about language in social work and child protection, and we need to keep being confronted and challenged about its meaning. Rob Sawyer, who did some fantastic work in Minnesota to reform their system, he talked about the most powerful change they brought in was asking caseworkers to replace the word. Every time they described a parent as hostile and aggressive, he asked them to replace it with fearful. And just that simple change alone, and how that changed the way people think and the way they approach families. The other thing I think we need to be very careful of in big statutory systems is the really bureaucratising language. So I don't know if you've read reports that I read all the time about incidences of domestic violence between parents and children exposed to domestic violence between parents. And, you know, if we use language about Johnny saw his father hit his mother and he heard her crying for help, if we talked in real words and real terms, it would be harder to ignore reports of that nature than the way we can use language to distance ourselves. So it's such an important point, and one we need to be brave and we need to stand together on.
Any others from the panel on language?
One of the things I reflect on the conference was got a sense in the conversation that we were bringing the art back into social work, not only to the language thing. And I think there's been a strong narrative around the science. So when you start to look at the data and you start to look at issues of targeting, you inevitably get down to language around vulnerability and so on. And I do wonder whether it's time to reclaim the art, really, and the importance of the relationship, and whether with the social work. Well, I became a social worker back in 1978, and I'm wondering whether I should go a bit retro, actually, and get back on the couch with the client. I mean, to talk, but to engage, right? To engage, to get on the couch with the client, to get round the table with my colleagues and engage, and forget about terms like brokerage and navigating, right? Because it's all transactional. So I do something about some of the languages about let's change the paradigm and let's bring both the art and I guess the heart back into what social workers do.
In regards to Pacific, we use the terminology talanoa is talking, it's the art of talk, you know, and also I think when we talk about language, Māori words is whānau and tautoko. I mean, while there are some English word needs to change, I think there are some really fantastic and powerful words from Māori language and also from Pacific language that identify with Pacifica. And for us, when we go and see, we don't see, when a client is older, we call them matua, which means a parent, you know, and we call them, when it's your child, we call them whānau, means that your child is my child. So I think for Pacific, I was talking Pacific, we are changing, we are using the language that comes natural to us and relates to our clients. Where we becomes very challenging is when we have to tell our social workers to write clinical notes and say, instead of saying, I went in Talanoa, because when an auditor comes, we had to use words as engage. We have to use the word as family violence. And also we had to be sensitive in our language in writing that mum hit dad because, you know, because of those Privacy Act and also people writing, so we had to say family violence. So while we understand there is a wordsmith needs to be done in this area, for us as Pacifica, we are employing some of those really critical words that engage or allow our family to talk with us.
Kia ora. Thank you so much. So that seems like a great place to finish.
Paul, I want to say something about language, if I may, very quickly. It's a cautionary point. Beware language that is used to create slogans. Slogans are potentially a very pernicious thing. So just to use some of the terms mentioned earlier, navigators, evaluation, outcomes, risk or vulnerability, and resilience have all become slogans. And if you ask someone what one of those means, they'll say X. You ask someone else, they'll say Y. And someone else will say Z. Right? So we end up failing in our communication because we take these thoughtless slogans and bandy them around willy-nilly without really talking about what we really want to say. So I'd make a plea for simple and accurate language.
Okay, cracking. So I asked the panel to be opinionated, and they certainly were. You've heard some very strong views, opinions. Fantastic panel. I feel like we could have another half hour of this, but we can't. We now have to move to the closing ceremony. So can I just ask you to show the appreciation to our panel, please, for their work? Thank you, panel. Great stuff.